science is evolving, and a lot of what you said is on the right track. You're absolutely right. Looking at how we can protect these areas, and it's remarkable how resilient and how effective coral reefs are, right?
Yeah.
And transitioning to climate and thinking about this relationship to it, we are highly dependent on these ecosystems for survival.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it is for food, whether it is for coastline and shoreline protection, whether it's for tourism and income, right? And so when we're thinking about these tropical marine ecosystems, they're really critical. Now, to your point about how their ability to kind of maintain and control or mitigate climate change.
Yeah.
Coral reefs do have impact because they're highly productive places, right? So they produce a lot of biomass, and these animals are consuming and producing things. But two other ecosystems in the Caribbean don't get enough credit, and they are actually more impactful in our fight towards climate change than even the entire Amazon rainforest.
Really?
And those are seagrass beds and mangrove habitats.
Oh, okay.
So when I was in grad school is when I actually came across this, is in 2015. And Dr. Wilson Grimes, she was our professor who introduced something called blue carbon. Have you ever heard of blue carbon?
No, that's the first time I'm hearing it. So,
oh, great. You guys are about to learn something new, man.
Yeah. Learn something new every day,
That's what we out here, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Blue carbon, these two ecosystems per square foot, right? Sequester more carbon out of the atmosphere than rainforests. So when you go out to the Florida Keys and there are miles and miles of seagrass meadows out there, these seagrass communities are actually pulling a lot of carbon out of the water, and they're trapping it inside the soil and in their roots and in these sediments, right?
Yeah.
And I've actually been to, when you go to some seagrass communities, they're so rich and so vibrant, and they're so productive. They're photosynthesizing and doing all this work that you can actually see small oxygen bubbles release from these seagrass communities, right?
Yeah.
Really, really rich. And that carbon is trapped underwater. And that's the critical difference between marine and terrestrial ecosystems. On terrestrial ecosystems, right, we understand that trees and rainforests sequester a lot of carbon, and this is true. However, when those leaves, trees will grow, and in those leaves, there are carbon in that, and they'll fall to the ground. They'll break down and turn to soil, and that's how you sequester carbon into the soil that way. When these leaves break down, they actually release small amounts of CO2. Compared to mangroves, on the other hand, where half submerged underwater, they do the same thing. They're growing, they're pulling carbon into their tissues, and they're growing into the actual structures. And mangroves actually, as a way to survive salt water, they put out a lot of leaves, and they put salt in a few of these leaves, and they'll turn yellow, and they'll fall back into the water. And this actually is more efficient at trapping carbon than terrestrial ecosystems, because once it drops underwater, that extra CO2 that's released is trapped in the water.
Sorry to cut you off, but does the extra CO2 affect the water at all, like the oceans?
Yes, it does. That is another aspect of climate change and our need to stop using fossil fuels. A majority, or I think it's like 30% of the carbon that is released into the atmosphere is absorbed by the ocean, right?
Wow.
And that leads to something called ocean acidification that makes it difficult for majority of marine life that build calcium carbonate skeletons or, use calcium carbonate in their bodies to form shells and stuff is going to be diminished. But so long story short, these two ecosystems, mangroves and seagrasses, actually do a much more efficient and better job at pulling carbon out of the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so it's something that we need to think about. And if anyone is interested in studying these ecosystems and learning more about them, these are going to be places that actually can help us fight climate change. Protecting seagrass beds, making sure that people who drive boats don't, cut up the seagrass, making sure we're not clearing mangroves for, $1 million mansions and things like this are going to be able to help us become more resilient in the future.
Yeah, because as we know, like the climate, the CO2 has increased and it has impacted everything. not just on land, but also in the water. But yeah, just I did. That's interesting though, that I never thought of it as like mangroves and seagrass are actually more efficient at, capturing this carbon and actually making a difference.